All right, y'all, listen, reality check time. Dealing with the government is not easy. Being in the government is not easy, okay? There's all kinds of shit that you want to do, and it's hard. It is literally, sometimes, and figuratively, a giant aircraft carrier that turns and moves very slowly. If you look back at the history of defense reform initiatives, after our American citizens were held as hostage in Iran for over 400 days in the late 70s, a failed hostage rescue attempt known as Desert One, Operation Eagle Claw, killed 8 service members, embarrassed the United States on the international stage. That set in motion the creation of what we have today as the Joint Force, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You would think after a public embarrassment like Desert One, a failed hostage rescue, Congress and the department would move out and fix things. One of the key problems, one of the causes of the disaster at Desert One was very clearly that our Army and our Air Force did not work together. This spurred the creation of the Joint Force, U.S. Special Operations Command. You would think that after a public embarrassment like that, the Congress and the department would move out and they would fix everything that was an issue. It took 6 years to write the Goldwater-Nichols Act that created the Joint Force and then subsequently U.S. Special Operations Command. The government does not move fast, even when you're in the government and you have incentive and motivation and requirements to move out. So there's a lot going on in acquisition reform, buying reform, structure of the military, speed, efficiencies, all the things that are going on right now, the war fighting acquisition system, all this. But let's just be very clear. It is not easy, even when you're in the government and you're on the same team. So there was a article written by Bill Greenwald out of the Hudson Institute. Great dude, knows what he's talking about, has been living and breathing reform and Doge before it was Doge, before it was cool. And he had an article that if you follow me on LinkedIn, which I'm sorry if you do, but I wanted to amplify and double down on Bill's points that we're watching the process of government as it happens, and it's oftentimes very frustrating and sometimes underwhelming. So with President Trump at the top of the administration and all of the momentum that we have behind national security, reform at the Department of War, it still falls short sometimes. So we had a draft memorandum that said we're going to do all this stuff, basically burn the whole system down and start over in a way that's more efficient. It's more streamlined. It's got more accountability. Less people mean more accountability, right? Less offices mean more accountability. Less duplication and leads to less finger pointing, right? The draft memo came out and a lot of us were out here, cheerleading the whole thing. I'm an incrementalist. I'm not about burn the whole fucking system down because there are only 2 states of man, order and chaos. And chaos will be ordered, but it's a big question of how it orders itself. In the case of the American Revolution, seemingly went pretty fucking well. Big fan. When Portland decided it wanted to be autonomous for like a day, they had a warlord pretty fucking quickly. Don't do that. I'm an incrementalist. I understand it takes baby steps to make real and lasting change. Copy. While the final memo that was produced was not everything we would have all loved to see from the draft, it is absolutely tangible steps in the right direction. So what changed? The initial idea was fixed delivery cycles, fielding mandates, timelines, schedules, clean authority between the PMs, the PAEs, and the service acquisition executives, OTAs as a default for a contracting mechanism, harsher standards for most modular open systems architecture, and more hard metrics for commercial content and commercial first business practices. Okay, fine. That didn't all happen, unfortunate. But the concern that I have is where there are opportunities to go back to the old system, those are usually the places that cause the unraveling of change. There is this ridiculous word that we overuse in the government, and it's called practicable, right? Practical, not practical, but practicable. It's basically do it where you can. I don't like this word. I don't like this word for a lot of reasons. In legislation, when you read, say, the NDAA, there are may and there are shall clauses. The clauses for shall are you will do this by and under the penalty of law. There are may clauses that says if you want to do it. Practicable is essentially a may clause, and I don't like those. It takes the teeth away from the bill or the legislation or the regulation or the policies in this case, and it is an open door for laziness and cutting corners, and that's where new change unravels. And that's my ultimate concern is some of the teeth were taken out of this, and it gives the people who do not want the change opportunity to not change. Either way, we are getting reform. We are getting change. We have clear and directive memos, and I'm a big fan of that. So, working in specifically with the Department of War Tech, National Security, whatever the fuck we're calling it today, it's a roller coaster. There are ups and downs. I love the draft. I'm not so happy about the final, but I trust the people who know what they're doing in this system to put forward good implementation steps that we will see in further DoD directives, DoD instructions, DFARS changes that hopefully return to the strengthening of the shall clauses rather than the may or practical clauses. The real low of my week is when we just keep doing the shit the same way that we're doing it. Again, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm sorry, but I lost my fucking mind that the Air Force cut a $1.5 billion contract to a company that is not known for doing anything new, for doing anything innovative. It's not one of the greatest companies that we have seen that is breaking the mold, doing things at risk. It is a traditional defense contractor who is basically a conglomerate of other defense contractors, which is they are a product of the consolidation of the defense industry that we had before the 1980s and 90s, where there was real competition and there was diversification of the industry. They are actually a product of consolidation. And this is incongruent with everything the department is saying for one of the most important programs that we have, JADC2. The problem with this structure is then this old, clunky, not innovative company gets to pick their subcontractors. In a $1.4 billion contract, there is a lot of decision-making space that is now relinquished to the contractor, who, by definition, is antithetical to the acquisition reform strategy that was put out. I have all the receipts and the details on the post I put up on LinkedIn, but literally in the acquisition reform strategy, it says reverse consolidation, and then they cut a $1.4 billion contract to a consolidation company. It's just, that is my low for the week. If we had a little therapy session here and we were talking about our highs and lows, that is my low for the week. It's unfortunate. It's a function or a symptom of the old process that is clinging to life and hopefully will soon be put out of its misery. But now, where's my high for the week? My high for the week is in the Drone Dominance Program, the DDP. We talked about that a little bit before. RFI was released on December 2nd. This is really, really great stuff. I don't know if I have a better, more articulate word for that, but it's really, really great stuff. And this is why. It is a clear market signal. Okay, so going back to the Replicator initiative, My issue with the replicator initiative was not that it was a bad idea. It was a great idea. Buy hundreds of thousands of drones, put them in the Indo-Pacific to deter Chinese Communist Party threats, and if necessary, defeat them in combat with robots, because they have 4 times as many people as us. So if they mobilize their entire country, we're out of Schlitz, ladies and gentlemen. Whether that's people on the factory floor or dudes with rifles, they have more people than us. And if you've been watching the war in Ukraine, attrition matters. Okay? So we have the robots go fight for us. Big fan of this. Terminator 2 fundamentally changed my life. Not mad at this at all. The problem was it was a great idea that was rolled out ahead of any strategy, any budget, any programs behind it. And it was a great idea that ultimately died in inaction, because you don't roll something out until you have step 2, 3, and 4 done. Because when Congress hears about your multi-million dollar, hundreds of thousands of drones programs for the first time in your press release, and there's not a budget behind it, it usually doesn't work very well. Somebody once said a strategy without resources is fantasy or some shit like that. I don't know what the quote is, but whatever it is, it's accurate. Okay, so why is this going to be different? Why is it different this time? Why will it work this time? Well, because they're creating a market first. There's actual market creation. And 2, under the new structures of the PAEs and the warfighting acquisition system, there is already a system in place to execute, which was what was missing from the original replicator idea. So there are clear deliverables, very clear to the market, that we want vendors that can make thousands. Okay. You have to make thousands of these things. You have to fly in live testing in real operational and operationally simulated environments with real operators, with the warfighters on the ground. Holy shit. Maybe we should let the guys and gals who have to go use this thing have a fucking say in the process. Crazy. Also, they define target missions. 10-kilometer strike missions. 1-kilometer urban strike missions, so that's a contested or GPS denied area. Certain payloads, EW and jamming resistant. Okay, they are going to start rolling out through the drone dominance problem, challenge after challenge after challenge. And if the follow-on challenges are any indication of what's to come, we will see clear numbers, clear deliverables, requirements, and all of this stuff will be up front. And then knowing that we have the new PAE structure, we have the reconciliation or the one big beautiful bill funding that very clearly said low-cost drones, low-cost interceptors, low-cost counter-UAS. There are billions of dollars executable right now against this strategy, and this is why it works this time. If the old way doesn't claw its way out of the fucking grave like a zombie movie and poison the whole new system. Also, the Army, in their new Army open solicitation. So if you're familiar with the Air Force open topics, the Army is following suit. Instead of saying, build me X, they are defining problems. And you can answer the problems with your solution. It probably defies science, logic, gravity, that helicopters exist. You said, build me stairs so I could get to the top of the mountain. People might build you stairs. They might build rock climbing equipment. They might build a fucking teleporter. I don't know. But when there was a problem, people came to the table with solutions and wow, helicopters were created. That's weird. I didn't think I would need that. The Marine Corps uses vertical lift heavily. Why? Because they have to get their things off of ships. So the V-22 is like the most mutant aircraft ever, but it was created for a very specific need. Helicopters are no different. So as we move forward and say, hey, we have this problem, we might get fucking teleporters. Who knows? The open solicitations allow you to bring your ideas and solutions to the Army for a problem of which they have defined, but then they have not defined the solution and the big R requirement. That's like, I need a thing that's this long and this tall with this many bolts, which favors the old zombie ways of doing business, of which only antiquated defense dinosaurs can answer the mail on that. There's always schedule slip and cost overruns in major defense acquisition programs. Anyways, that's besides the point. The point is the Army is following suit and just saying, hey, we're going to tell you our problems. You tell us what you think the solution is, and we'll pick the best one. I love this. Okay, that's out on the street right now. It's specifically for the electronic warfare world. It's called Iris, maybe EW payloads. They want high altitude. They want vehicle mounted. So if you're making drones, if you're making vehicles, if you're making ground robots, the Army's interested. Love that. Great opportunities coming out, all following suit, except for the Air Force on your giant IDIQ to a dinosaur for 1.4 billion Air Force. Come on, get your shit together. Department of War, crushing it. Drone dominance program, love it. Army open topics, love it. Okay, so that's where we're at for opportunities at the moment. Everyone seems to be following suit. Love it. Check. Okay, big fucking news. I mean, yeah, I guess. Big fucking news. We'll just go with that. New national security strategy on the street. Okay, let's talk about what this is. When you look across what it takes to do business with the Department of War, there's a few buckets of things that you need to get really good at to really make this all make sense. First, you need to understand your customer, right? Who your customer is, what they need, what their problems are, and how your solution solves that problem. That's pretty standard. I don't think that's going over anybody's head. The second piece of this is you need to align to the processes and systems that are in place. Again, I'm not a revolutionary, and I am not somebody who lives in fantasy world that I'm going to live outside of a system that currently exists. You just learn to deal with the system. Fortunately for all of us, the system's getting better. So you understand the system. How do contracts work? How are things acquired? How does the budget form up? And how do people actually get their money to spend on the things that you make, right? These are all, in concept, very simple things. In practice, they're not. They're complicated, but that's fine. That's why we're here. The other piece is communication. You have to communicate with your customer in a way that they understand. If you looked at this in a commercial sense and somebody was like, oh, I don't know, my feet really hurt. And you're like, oh, interesting. I sell plastic. The guy's like, okay, great. My feet still hurt. If you explain to them that their piece of plastic goes in between their foot in the ground and you make sneakers and that will relieve their foot pain, now they understand why your plastic is something they should buy. Lots of people in the startup community have issues communicating to their customers, a lot of times just because the military community and the national security community has its own language and it has its own like ecosystem or its own culture and society inside of it. And we just talk funny, right? So understanding how to align your communications to your customers could be just as important as talking to the right customer, right? If you're selling rifles, you don't sell them to the IT guys that work in the Pentagon. At the same time, if you're selling rifles, you don't tell somebody that you sell metal, right? Communicate properly. So, national security strategy is the beginning of the process in our federal government of the administration communicating to the world, ipso facto, the way you should communicate back to them. This is why it's important. Comms, strategic communications. Let's cut the shit and just call them information operations are fucking psyops. That's what they are, right? You're just going to use the language of the government and your customer to communicate with them. Mirroring in communication is a very, very strong tool. So when there is a new administration, there is a new national security strategy. This starts at the White House, the top of our federal government, when it comes to the executive branch. While Congress is the superior body, the getting a sense of Congress is usually still a very slim majority of not all of Congress. At least when you have an administration, there is a concise and unitary idea of what that administration is going to do. So that's why we start there. The national security strategy will lead into the national defense strategy. The national defense strategy will lead into the national military strategy. The national military strategy will turn into the defense planning guidance. The defense planning guidance will turn into service-specific strategies that we'll get, like Marine Corps Force Design 2030. Then you will get subordinate strategies to that, all the way down to, I don't know, the Marine Corps strategy on information dominance, or whatever the most recent one was, right? And it goes down and down and down and down. And they're all derivative of the previous document to be aligned with the executive of the country, the CEO of our country, which is the president, right? So national security strategy starts that. Everything that happens after this will be aligned and nested with the national security strategy. And everything that you do should also be aligned with the national security strategy. What does that mean? That means as these come out, get with your teams, get with your marketing, get with your advertising folks, and redo shit. Rewrite your website, rewrite your one-pagers. Make sure that you're not speaking about things that are misaligned with the customer that you're trying to sell to, okay? I don't think I need to beat that dead horse anymore, so let's get into what's in the new national security strategy. Now, this being said, this is a political document. Make no bones about this. This is signed out with the signature from the President of the United States. It is a political document. I am going to discuss the parts and pieces of it that are relevant to this conversation. I encourage everyone to read it, whether you are a Republican, a Democrat, or a freaking Martian. I don't care. Read it and at least understand what the intent of the administration is, whether you agree with it or not, across all of these things. I'm just telling you, as an American who lives in a country where we don't teach civics anymore and it's a disaster, this will be important to everyone's life. But in this case, we'll keep it in scope. The new national security strategy has a list of priorities, and then it has a list of regional focus areas, which I think are important to anybody doing business in national security or specifically with the Department of War. So, first and foremost, they're in a general priority order. I'm going to take a little bit of liberties here so that we save the good stuff for last. But first, in the list of priorities that we're going to discuss is burden sharing and burden shifting. Okay, we've heard President Trump talk about this quite a bit. He's been very vocal about European nations, NATO nations, paying more for their own security. He's enforced minimum GDP spending levels on NATO countries. Some NATO countries have done more. Some have done the minimum. Irrelevant. This is in our list of topics. This came first. The interesting part about this is, as you read through this section and then subsequent sections, it's not only focused on the European and NATO allies and partners, but also the Asian allies and partners, specifically calling out burden sharing responsibilities with Japan and South Korea. This is generally new in the way that President Trump has discussed burden sharing in the past. I think it's sensible. I think it's a logical progression of this concept that he has been very strong on. I think it's the right thing to do. We shouldered a lot of burden for the security of nations after World War II. Japan specifically, our European allies that were decimated by the war, specifically a few years after World War II. South Korea. South Korea was almost flattened. Well, South Korea was very agrarian at the time, but it was mostly flattened in the war. We took up a lot of responsibilities. Now, these are now thriving economies and countries. They're crushing it. So it just makes sense that we treat them more as partners and peers rather than these, tattered, torn, war-torn states that need our protection, right? They don't need that. They need our help, maybe. They would benefit from our partnership, but the expansion of burden sharing and burden shifting just makes a lot of sense. So as you consider how you, one, speak about your work overseas, or as you engage with the global economy, know that our government, our Department of War, is going to be less inclined to pay for other people's things while opening the door for you to sell to them directly. Let me put a pointier tip on that. Don't explain what you're doing in a way that makes anyone in the Department of War think that they need to give a handout to somebody. Just tell them how you're going to strengthen them and let them pay for it. All right, moving on. Next one. No surprise here. This has been consistent over the last administration, under the Biden administration, under the first Trump administration. Securing access to critical supply chains and materials. No surprise there. Right? We just keep going. I don't need to beat a dead horse on this one. Really cool to see. Be honest. I don't know where this term came from. It's become very, very cool. It's a cool term nowadays, but I don't know who made it up. Maybe somebody's got a trademark on it. I don't know. But to see it in the national security strategy is actually pretty awesome. Reindustrialization, right? Pretty cool. Bringing things back to America and making things in America again. That makes sense. Do I think we should make every cheap piece of shit that I can buy at Walmart? No. But are there things in the global economy that we've offshored to our detriment? Abso-fucking-lutely. And I think the last administration and the first Trump administration has done a really good job dialing in what needs to come back to America. And it's a lot of the high-end manufacturing. It's in the Chips and Science Act kind of stuff. So a continuation of that makes total sense. Fully agreed. Next, energy dominance. Again, no surprise here. This continues over two administrations. Energy dominance, as we've seen, again, going back to the war in Ukraine, you become subservient to your energy provider. There are countries in Europe that have made bad decisions for their own national security because they're dependent on Russian oil. I don't want to go down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, but it's not surprising to me that Russian non-state actors and people linked to Russian interests are a huge driver of the green energy movement because, yeah, Germany can get off fossil fuels, great, but that doesn't mean that you still don't need them and you're just going to get them from somewhere else. And when that person is not your friend, you become compromised in your decision making. Energy dominance is probably the core of all national security because we can't be subservient to anyone else for our own means of production, right? This makes sense. Taking this next logical step, if you're doing anything in energy, this is a really great section of the NSS to start reshaping your messaging. Pull parts of this. I mean, I don't have any any clips or quotes from the NSS yet. We're still going to do probably more deeper dive analysis on the different parts and pieces. But I mean, anything that's in there that aligns with what you're doing in your company, in your mission, just pull that line out of there. Like, don't even worry about plagiarizing it. Like, literally put it at the top of your one pager. The national security strategy says blah, 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 blah. I'm doing that. Next slide. All right. Easy day. I skipped around one to hit home on in the national security strategy in this one and in all the NSS's previous to this, they're national level. They don't get too deep into the different cabinet areas, right? They don't get too much into diplomacy or war or whatever that means. It's broad, kind of high levels. In here, it specifically calls out reviving our defense industrial base. Okay. Wins across the board there. It's still at a high level, but it defines and it explains that our defense industrial base underpins our entire national security. Very Reagan-esque peace through strength. It's great to see that in there. It just continues the trend that we've seen since January, that this administration puts national security, the defense of our nation, and our ability to, empower our military and our civilians at the Department of War in a very real way. So, great. Good, really great top line stuff. Nothing really surprising. Pull clips from it, put them on your website, put them on your one-pagers. When the NDS comes out, National Defense Strategy, do the same damn thing. When we get into the regional areas, there are some very interesting points. And now, again, you're probably not watching this because you're some policy wonk who wants to have big thoughts about things and write books. You're probably in a small business or a startup who makes things or provides services to the Department of War and other federal branch agencies. So let's apply this where appropriate. We go back to knowing your user, knowing your customer, and knowing who buys things and how within the Department of War. For a really long time, the Middle East, or in government terms, or in Department of War terms, U.S. Central Command was the focus following 9/11. No big surprise there. We spent billions and billions of dollars fighting wars in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, AOR. That shifted over time to the Pacific in military terms, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. While conflicts still rage in the Middle East, those are more near-term and acute threats where the Indo-Pacific and specifically the rise of the aggression from the Chinese Communist Party, potential concerns about the hostile takeover of Taiwan, their incursion in territorial and international waters and airways of their neighbors, some of which are treaty partners and treaty allies and partners of the United States, is all very concerning. If you go in and read the Chinese version of the national security strategy, I'm not going to go into all of that. Happy to do a deep dive on that if you want. But basically it says by 2049, we are going to own our half of the world and America can go fuck itself. And if they want to fuck around, they can find out, which is why we're in the world that we're in right now. No big deal. We know that that's in there. So we have ongoing conflict in the Middle East, specifically right now in Israel. In the not too distant future, we've seen Iranian attacks in Jordan that took the lives of multiple Americans and wounded dozens and dozens at the Tower 22 attack. We've seen aggression out of the Iranian proxy states in Lebanon, in Iraq, in the real big problem, Iranian proxy state in Yemen. We've seen global commerce affected by problems in the Red Sea. So all that's going on. We have the China problem that we just talked about. We have a land war in Europe between Ukraine and Russia. And this administration is now putting first in their list of priorities the Western Hemisphere. This is the biggest departure from focus and shift in over 30 years. Since 9/11, we have been focused on the Middle East and then Indo-PACOM and then Europe, and that's been going back and forth. What is in this national security strategy is a direct reference to the Monroe Doctrine. And for all my history nerds out there, they even call it the Trump corollary, which is a hat tip to the Roosevelt corollary that was a derivative of the Monroe Doctrine. So there is a direct shift in focus on the Western Hemisphere. This is in line with what we see going on right now in Venezuela, taking care of our own backyard, dealing with the drug and narco-terrorist issues emanating from there. It obviously has to do with border issues. It has to do with Golden Dome. All of these things are very much in line. I'm not surprised by this. Just know that it's the largest national level shift in security strategy focus in over 30 years. That means if what you're doing is applicable to Western Hemisphere operations, you should probably talk about that with your customer where applicable before you discuss, say, the Middle East or Europe, if this all makes sense, right? Obviously, if you're talking to, European Command, EUCOM, don't talk about the Western Hemisphere. But if you're talking to more broadly the Army or the Air Force, and you have a more direct application to a Western Hemisphere or a defense of the homeland application, that should be first in your talking points from here on out. Moving down, no surprise, Asia is second. So Asia and the Indo-Pacific Command. And I want to quote exactly how they define the Asia regional priority. Win the economic future, comma, prevent military confrontation. Okay. This is very, very important in how they define it. There are direct sections of this document that talk about non-interventionist policies. This in no way, shape, or form says that we are destined into a conflict with the CCP. And I think everyone in America could agree that's a good thing. So preventing military confrontation is a Trump way of continuing the previous Biden administration focus on deterrence. Now, don't say it like that because you're talking to the wrong administration. Say prevent military confrontation or whatever, but focus on the deterrent or the conflict avoidance, confrontation avoidance nature of things. And then the, in parentheses, subtext, and if they fuck around, they'll find out, right? Like that's a good way to hinge what you're doing to be very in line with this national security strategy. All right. There is a piece in almost every document that will come out that always grabs me because these are people who write these documents. Now, keep this in mind. To get the national security strategy out the front door and into the public, hundreds of people edit this thing. Hundreds. But there are things in here that aren't like the big top line, like wham, bam, Western Hemisphere. And you're like, oh, shit. And like that. There are parts in all of these documents, regardless of the administration, that I'm like, I see what you did there. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're bad. But you can see where people like get things in that you just want to like maybe smile a bit. There's a section under the Asia chapter that I want to highlight. And if you're in this space, you should absolutely be taking this and running through the brick wall like the fucking Kool-Aid man with this paragraph. And I don't want to bore people and read shit. I can barely fucking read, but this is important. In the Asia section, it says, additionally, the United States government's critical relationship with the American private sector helped maintain surveillance of persistent threats to the U.S. networks, including critical infrastructure. This, in turn, enables the U.S. government's ability to conduct real-time discovery, attribution, and response, i.e., network defense and offensive cyber operations, while protecting the competitiveness of the U.S. economy and bolstering the resilience of the American technology sector. Improving these capabilities will also require considerable deregulation to further improve our competitiveness, spur innovation, and increase access to America's natural resources. Okay. If that sounded like some big head, 10-pound brain shit that didn't make a lot of sense to you, let me cut to the chase here. The first Trump administration gave significantly increased offensive cyber authorities to the military. We know we are getting crushed in cyber, especially when we talk about non-state actors or little green men. Our adversaries are so good at using non-state actors to disrupt our national interests in the cyber domain. And I'll be really fucking clear with everybody. If a bad guy country launched a nuclear missile today, we know exactly what to do about that, and it's going to be bad. We don't really know what to do with the nuclear equivalent of a cyber attack. And this is a big gray space where us and the bad guys are like pushing that line every so often to see like really where something that happens in the cyber environment would be responded with a physical or a military action. And this is highly undefined. The first Trump administration gave significantly increased offensive cyber operation authority to the U.S. military to compete better in this space. The fact that the NSS clearly calls out the need to conduct real-time discovery, attribution, and response with offensive cyber operations and will require considerable deregulation to improve our competitiveness. If you are in the cyber, the on-network, the enterprise level world of national security, they didn't just open the door, they knocked down the wall for you to bring new ideas and new solutions that could have been previously disregarded as too aggressive or too risky, or, oh, no, that's only a thing that this one person in the government can do. Your door is wide open. If you're doing network defense or cyber offense or anything on network at this point, or you're providing networks or ecosystems or enterprise solutions, start making some fucking phone calls, because they're on team you starting now. And then ultimately it closes with a very clear kind of putting a bow on the whole thing. Deterring a conflict over Taiwan by preserving military overmatch is a priority. So now we're back into the theory of deterrence. We're in a world of deterrence in the physical and the military sense, while expanding operations in the digital, the cyber, and ultimately this irregular warfare or this gray zone world where traditionally we've been very bad at. Big fan of this. The earlier section talking about burden sharing is then balanced out in the regional section. And I'm a little bit surprised by the wording here. Like I said, hundreds of people edit this document. There's not a word in here that wasn't approved. There's a section in here that's called promoting European greatness. Okay. So if we go back to the Declaration of Independence, where we define what the government should do before we get into the breakup letter with England. It says the role of, I'm paraphrasing here, don't quote me, but it says the role of government is to ensure the national security while promoting the general welfare. Again, all words have meanings, and words that end up in these documents are put there on purpose. The government must ensure our national security while promoting the general welfare. Promoting is a supporting or an intangible function, whereas ensuring is a very tangible activity. So here it says promoting, using the same terminology of just supporting and, intangibly wanting things to happen well in Europe for our partners and allies over there, because that is the Western society of which brings peace and prosperity to the globe and has raised billions of people out of poverty and suffering in the last 100 years. No big question there. But there is a section in here that speaks specifically, as does the Asia section, speaking to the very acute question of Taiwan. There is a section in here, amongst other things, of just saying we need to work with our partners and allies in Europe. It specifically addresses Ukraine. So for the last few years since the war in Ukraine has started, a lot of companies have done a really great job in providing technologies to Europe and Ukraine. They've done a good job taking the lessons learned there and trying to apply them to what the United States military would need. So while it is terrible what is going on in Ukraine, no question, it has served as a wake-up call, I think, to the military and the technology community broadly, that if we had to get into that conflict today, it would be very different than the war and the conflict that we had in the post 9/11 world, where we've seen the rise of first person view drones in a way that we've never seen in any other conflict. The electronic warfare and the spectrum warfare environment is unprecedented right now. So I think everybody had a question of, what does the Trump administration do in regards to Ukraine? And here you have your first glimmer of this, not in a press conference or in a X post, but in real words that define this administration's priority. It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine in order to stabilize European economies, prevent unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and reestablish strategic stability with Russia, as well as enable the post-hostility reconstruction of Ukraine to enable its survival as a viable state. This is very Trump. Very Trump. Ukraine is a country, and it will continue to be a country. We need to be in some steady state relationship with Russia. They are not going anywhere. We are not doing regime change there, whether we're friends or we're enemies or we're some kind of thing in between. The strategic stability of our relations with the Russian state matter. The ending of the conflict and the rebuilding of Ukraine is important to all of Europe, the European economy. And he very clearly says it is the core interest of the United States to stabilize European economies. You can't ask Europe to do more burden sharing if they're bleeding resources into a forever war. Pretty straightforward. It doesn't take working with Ukraine off the table, but the fact that it says an expeditious cessation of hostilities, you should not be talking to anyone in the Department of War about accelerating or adding fuel to the fire in Ukraine. You are going to be off message, off brand, and that is not going to serve well for you. It doesn't mean that we are not going to continue to provide support to Ukraine. I don't think this document says that in any way, shape, or form. We are probably going to do that for a long time. But again, understand that this administration's priority is ending the conflict, supporting reconstruction, and getting to a point of strategic stability in the region. Provide your products and services, don't fuel the fire. Okay. It does absolutely get into the Middle East. We kind of talked about this. It's a light touch here, ensuring Gulf energy supplies don't fall into the hands of the enemy, stabilizing the Straits of Hormuz, stabilizing the Red Sea, ensuring it's navigable, staying away from fruitless nation building wars, and expanding the Abraham Accords, right? So again, there's nothing about let's overthrow Iran. There's nothing about let's double down, triple down in the Middle East. The AOR CENTCOM will continue to be a point of acute conflict, undoubtedly for fucking forever. I have no idea. But again, deliver products and services and shape your narrative around providing what is needed right now. Don't be communicating long-term investment into the CENTCOM AOR. You will be off-brand there, and I would guess as we see a fiscal year 27 president's budget request come out early next year, hopefully around February, you will see declining funding projections for the European and the Central Command AORs, while you will undoubtedly see an increase in Western Hemisphere, Northcom operations, and Indo-Pacific operations. And then finally, they touch on Africa. The continent has always been this Pandora's box that nobody really knows how to deal with. I mean, it's within, I think, the last decade that we even had an Africa command. It used to be split between CENTCOM and EUCOM. The continent's always been a puzzle for the U.S. military. From time to time, things will pop up here. It's such an incredibly diverse continent that it's really hard for the American apparatus to deal with it. As somebody who's lived on the continent and traveled, I think, to over 14 countries, I like the way the national security strategy here addresses the continent. We must remain wary of resurgent Islamic terrorist activity while avoiding any long-term American presence or commitments. The terror threats that exist on the continent are very similar to the ones that we face in CENTCOM. They are generally regional threats that in no way, shape, or form pose an existential threat to the United States of America. There's very little intent or capability to launch attacks on the U.S. homeland. They will attack interests abroad, but in the Trump administration mindset, not having permanent presence over there reduces their ability to do that because we don't have a consistent footprint over there, which relegate these threats to, while unfortunate, regional or even national level concerns for countries that may or may not be in the U.S. national interest. Broad stability of the world, right? Like Miss America, I'm going to, go peace and love in the world and I'm going to end wars. Like that's not real, right? There's always going to be conflict. There's been conflict in humanity since the first time a caveman picked up a rock and hit some other caveman dude over the head with it. Like it's not going away. We're not going to solve every problem on the planet if countries are not in the U.S. national interest. This national security strategy is very much saying we're not going to get involved there, right? So that being said, remain wary of resurgent Islamic terrorist activity does not mean we're going to get involved in it. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, lots of activities going on there. This administration saying, first, show me the U.S. national interest in why we get involved there. Or maybe we just let those countries deal with it themselves. Avoiding any long-term presence or commitments. We saw this under the last Trump administration. We shut down a lot of operations on the continent that we had going on there, to include, air bases that we had created for drones in Niger. There was close down of operations in East Africa, specifically in Kenya, and operations in Somalia. So this is congruent. I'm not surprised at all that the Trump administration is saying avoid any presence or long-term commitments. The issue that this creates for me, just on a geopolitical level, is this is where China thrives, is in the absence of another option, which I'm not saying that the U.S. has ever been good at doing on the continent, but this is where they come in with their heavy-handed wolf warrior diplomacy. They find a dictator at a country and go, hey, if we give you 5G for free, can we steal all your national secrets? They say yes, because they're corrupt oligarch assholes. And China creates more dictators around the world. That's just generally not good, but I understand how they got there, specifically having worked in the counterterrorism and irregular warfare directorate at the Pentagon during the last Trump administration and closing down some of these operations. This is not a surprise at all. What I think is very positive for the business community, and now we're really stretching into emerging markets. So if you're a startup in the US and you want to sell something to, the UK or Australia, we have an AUKUS. That's easy. You call up somebody else who, speaks the same language as you, with a stable economy and a real military and a budget, and you sell them a thing. Okay, great. We're really into the emerging market world here, but this says the United States should transform from an aid-focused relationship with Africa to a trade and investment-focused relationship, favoring partnerships with capable, reliable states committed to opening their market to U.S. goods and services. So there's an opening of the continent as a market, while saying we're getting out of aid and we're getting out of unnecessary presence, military presence on the continent. So where could this have benefit? It very clearly says in here, capable and reliable states. So if we look at the stability in the continent, we can see places like Morocco, for instance, maybe Senegal, South Africa, obviously. There are places here where our exports could be that counteracting force to the Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy, where they're saying, hey, we'll come in, we'll build everything for you. And then when you default on your payments, you're basically going to become a Chinese client state. This is the opportunity that this administration's opening up through this national security strategy and saying, hey, why don't we create partnerships and relationships that are investment focused and bring U.S. goods and services to the continent in a way that draws them into the U.S. orbit. I don't necessarily know what that is. I'm going to be totally honest. If you look at the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, it's the State Department corollary to the Office of Strategic Capital. They have made a lot of investments in fintech, in telecommunications. So we go back to people and companies that are doing software as a service, on network, cloud, fintech, cyber. I'd probably say that that's a good starting point. The continent is, especially the places where I was predominantly in West Africa, the people there, like the actual everyday citizen, really love fintech and other cyber and data security capabilities, like even just say like a VPN or a data messaging app like a WhatsApp or a Signal, because it's their way of subverting, or not subverting, but getting around their corrupt governments. So, if you have a revolutionary spark in you and you want to enable some free market anarchy, and you're in software or fintech or data, this could be a great opening for some direct to consumer sales or who knows on the continent. I think it's a really great way to address it in a let's make friends through making business partners rather than people who are dependent on us for handouts or people who are contractually subservient to us. We'll see how this works. All right. And we will end here with some cool quotes of the week, staying in the theme of communication, strategic communication, stratcoms, IO, or generally just bite the bullet and call them psyops. Pick your poison. Staying on message and on brand is very important as you communicate to your customers. Some really cool quotes of the week. Out of the Pentagon, we had from the Secretary of War. Every warfighter must have access to low-cost, attritable SUAS. This is in the press release from the Drone Dominance Program, RFI. Every warfighter must have access to low-cost SUAS. If you make a pocket-size, team-level tactical drone, you now put at the top of your white paper, every warfighter should have this. That's the first thing your customer should see, is that you are aware that their boss said everyone needs this. You've already eliminated one barrier. Now you just have to prove that you're the SUAS that they should buy. Secretary of the Air Force said air superiority is not guaranteed. Terrifying. This has always been, since World War II, since World War I, has been an area where the U.S. has been uncontested. The idea that the Secretary of the Air Force is now saying that we no longer control the skies is quite a large revelation. Therefore, if you're doing work in the air dominance domain, you should be addressing directly how this, whatever you're doing, reverses the tide that has now made the air domain contested or questionable. How do we get back to the air superiority days of World War II and fleets of bombers and fighters that black out the sky, right? How do we reacquire that air dominance? That's how you should be conceptualizing what you do if you work in that space. And finally, Secretary of the Army Driscoll, in discussing we train how we fight, acquisition should be no different. We fight wars when they happen. We don't get to determine their time and place. We don't get to negotiate with the enemy when we're going to schedule our meet me at the schoolyard at 3 p.m. after school. I'm going to kick your ass. That doesn't happen in real life. Fucking conflict just fucking happens. And we need a system that can meet that need. So the idea of training how you fight or having systems that are reflective of reality is a really great way to put the warfighter first focus on why we're doing all of this acquisition reform, because a capability that shows up 1, 2, 5, 10 years late is useless to the warfighter, is a terrible use of taxpayer dollars, and could be detrimental to the U.S. national interest abroad or in the homeland. So further embedding this warfighter urgency first focus of why we're going through this fucking roller coaster of reform is we need systems that reflect the realities of warfare and conflict. And that is just getting faster and faster by the day. So we need to adapt. So that was a long one. Lots going on. If there's anything in there that we should deep dive on, questions, comments, concerns, I'm fucking stupid, I'm wrong, send it. Happy to have the conversation. Yeah, that's it. Lots going on. New NSS. Read it, follow it, do the damn thing. Right? All right. Cut all that. Go back. All right. So that was a long one. Lots going on. Stay focused, stay up to date, stay educated, get in line, communicate properly, know the opportunities, know more, sell more, do more. Do great things. Do great things for our country in the way that you do them best. This is how you do it. This is the fucking playbook. See you next time.